Hello, this is Faith and Books, and I'm here to give my book review on Little Men. This is part of a almost year-long read-along called A Year with Louisa May Alcott. And we read Eden's Outcast, which was a prize-winning biography of Louisa May and her father. I'm suddenly forgetting his name. Bronson Alcott, was that it? And then we read Little Women in December, and then January was Little Men. So I finished reading this yesterday evening, and I immediately went and looked at Kate Howes and Megan Hannett. Never sure if I'm saying her name right. I looked at their videos because they're hosting this read along, and I had such completely different reaction to this book. I loved Little Men. Now it's a reread for me. I did read it aloud to my youngest daughter, maybe when she was 11 or so. We read the whole series, and before that I'd only read Little Women. And I have to say, I always had a little bit of problems with Little Women, maybe I said this before, because of the whole Laurie thing, because I really wanted Joe to wind up with Laurie, and I felt cheated when she didn't. I was actually angry. But I managed to reread it. When I read it again to my daughter out loud, I was over it. You know, I didn't feel the same bitter pangs. So anyway, so I think because I sort of let go of that, I was a little bit more open to Little Men, but also I think because I read Little Men as an adult who had been homeschooling for a long time and had really been steeped in a lot of educational philosophy. What I enjoy so much about Little Men is just how much it touches on educating children and all the different philosophies that were really just burgeoning at that time. Or maybe, I mean, I'm not sure, I should have looked up the chronology, but when did Louisa May Alcott write this book? Because I see so many of the, just the budding of the educational philosophy of Charlotte Mason and Montessori and even Rudolf Steiner and his Waldorf schools. And I guess she was reflecting the philosophy of her father, because he was an educator, right? I didn't know about that before I read Eden's Outcast, but I just love that aspect of this book, and it's so rich in it. Now I do know that it's a little bit hard to shift from Little Women to Little Men, because Little Women, Jo just sparkles and she just comes right off the page, and that's the character in Little Women that you really identify with. And when you move into Little Men, taking a cue from the title, it's not going to be about little women, girls growing up and becoming adults. It's going to be about boys. That's going to be the main focus. So you sort of have to let go of Jo a little bit, and you have to let her be in the background, which is what she is, more or less, as Mrs. Bear or Mother Bear or Mrs. Jo or whatever the name they give her. But I love Jo in this book because she's happy. She's contented. She's doing her life's work, and she's embraced this life. She wants to educate these boys so much. That's where her heart lies, and that's what she's able to do. And what I really, there's this sub-theme in this book about the complementarity of the sexes. And her marriage to Professor Bear really illustrates this, because they're partners. They're equal partners in running this school. And he does sort of the academic stuff because that's his background, and she's the idea person, and she manages things, and they both discipline together. They work really, really well together, and there's such an affection, and there's such a meeting of minds between them that they, even in the book, they just have to look at each other and they know what the other person is thinking. So I just love that aspect of it. And actually that's just a theme that runs throughout it, because although it's initially a school for boys, there is one girl in there, Daisy, because she's the twin of Demi. Demi and Daisy are the children of Meg, right? Meg and John Brooke. And so they're there at the school. It's this boarding school where they take in some orphans and then some relatives, and then some boys who can pay, who are just, they're there because it's a boarding school. I'm going to lose my train of thought. Anyway, so Daisy's there because she's the niece, right? But she becomes a little bit of a problem because as the only girl, she needs a little bit more attention than the other boys do, the other students do, because the boys will interact on their own. And so they'll go off and be their own thing, their own little universe. Whereas Daisy might partake somewhat in that, but she has different needs as a girl. So Joe finds that, like, how do I deal with this? So she goes off and she finds another girl, Nan, who she brings in. She talks to the parents. I guess Nan's been a problem child that Joe knew about. And so she brings her into the school to be a companion to Daisy. But the idea behind it is that the boys will be sort of, gentrified or gentled by the good influence of these girls. So boys and girls should be together because they can potentially bring out better traits in each other. So again, it's that sense of complementarity. So this is not the best book about if you're like a straight up third wave feminist or whatever wave it is, maybe second wave, because it really, in fact, wait, I have a quote that I read this book on my Kindle. I have a quote that I made a note of. At one point, towards the end of the book, Joe is talking about, I think she's talking to Laurie. She's having a conversation with Laurie, and she's talking about how the girls and boys play together. And she says, "Dear me, if men and women would only trust, understand, and help one another as my children do, what a capital place, the world would be." And Mrs. Joe's eyes grew absent, as if she were looking at a new and charming state of society in which people lived as happily and as innocently as her flock at Plumfield. So she really, I just love that idea that boys and girls are, different, but they interact. And of course, as children, they need to learn how to socialize properly. And so there are, another interesting element in the book is the different approach to bullying than we have today. We're very punitive, and we're very, everything's been pathologized or it's been criminalized, and we see things very much in that light. Whereas Joe sees it as a soul issue. It's a character issue. It's about virtue. And so she has a whole different way of dealing with it. And in fact, there's one scene where she helps a boy who's been picked on in a cruel way return good for evil. Right? And he wins the day. And the boys that have bullied learn to laugh at themselves and see that they did something wrong. And everyone feels a sense of unity. So instead of sort of victim and perpetrator, it's flawed people learning to get along. So I love that idea too, but there's so many instances in this book that, for instance, Daisy, when Daisy's first presenting her particular issues to Joe, and Joe's trying to figure out how to deal with her, she comes up with this idea, and she has a little kitchen that really works, built for Daisy. So Daisy can actually cook food for her dolls, but also give little tea parties for the boys and that sort of thing. And that is very much a Montessori idea, that children can do real work. so I love that, and that they made everything child size just for not Nan, sorry, Daisy, so that Daisy could do her thing. That's very Montessori. So I don't know if, Bronson Alcott was sort of prescient, or if all these ideas about children's education were floating around and Montessori just sort of picked up on them and then developed a more fully thought out philosophy or pedagogy. But I love that whole episode was really fun. And then the fact that the kids come up with their own museum of the things that they've collected. And I swear Eleanor Estes in her Moffat book, I got to go get that book out of the library and read it, but the Moffat Museum, I think she took that idea and ran with it with her own book. And all the nature study that goes on, because that's really something that Charlotte Mason and even like Rudolf Steiner, who started Waldorf, he was really into kids connecting with beauty and nature. I love the whole when Daisy is making things out of flowers, and all the different flowers that they list, and the different ways that she makes the different things she makes. The little boats and the bouquets and the nosegays and all that stuff, and that made me think of other books like who wrote the Flower Children or the Flower Fairies, or was it Cecily Mary Barker, somebody like that? Just all these elements are just sort of swirling around in this book. And the whole episode with the going out and the gathering the nuts. Again, I love the Thanksgiving feast where the children are all recounting, what they contributed to the feast, because they're children, but they can contribute. Nowadays, children are just seen as sort of financial drains, and they don't contribute at all. But back in the day, they were part of the family, and they worked too. They helped too. I love that idea, that the kids were so proud. I love the fact that each of the students get a garden, that they can grow their own thing, and then each child grows their own. The garden reflects the child, where they are, their personality, and where they are in their stage of development. And they each get a pet to take care of, or some kind of animal to take care of. And they're each encouraged to earn money in some way, but they aren't really directed as to how. Like if they're asked, Joe or Mr. or Professor Bear will tell them, but they sort of have to use their own ingenuity and figure out a way that they can come up with a way to earn money. Sorry, I need a drink. Anyway, it's I really enjoyed this book so much. I just delighted in the stories about the children. It opens with Nat, this young boy who's been a street musician with his father and his father's partner, and has lived this brutal life. And he's a very sensitive musician type, artist type. And his father dies, and somehow Mr. I guess it's Mr. Laurie. Was it Mr. Laurie or was it Teddy? I'm not sure, but somehow he comes under the notice of one of those, and they recommend him to go to the school. So he comes to the school, and he's very shy and timid, and he can't believe that after this life of hardship, he can barely read, he hasn't been educated, but he loves the violin, and he can play the violin. So we're introduced to the school through his eyes, and just what a warm and encouraging place it is for him. And then there's another main character named Dan, who's really troubled. He's had much more of his personality in response to all the trouble and neglect and abuse that he's encountered as a child has made him very tough and very suspicious. And so he's kind of a harder nut to crack. So his story is interesting too. I just found and a lot of it's laugh out loud funny. The whole scene where they, all the kids have to present their compositions to a group, and the different ways that each kid writes and what they write about. I mean, I just found it really funny, really amusing. There's just so much warm affection for children. Now, it's not a perfect book at all. It's flawed, I think, in the sense that Joe has a lot more faith, or maybe it was Louisa May Alcott, had a lot more faith in the ability of punishment to really cure a child's faults. I never found grounding or anything like that edifying to kids. I think a lot, at least for my crew, talking it out and just relying on that on a close bond and providing examples, which this book is one of those ways you can provide an example, because storytelling, telling stories or reading stories to children where children are confronting temptation and sin and flaws of their own, and seeing how other people, like a fable almost. And we've been teaching children using fables for forever. Anyway, I really enjoyed this book a lot, but I think I read it from a very different perspective. I wasn't looking for Joe to be front and center. I really was reading it because I wanted to, I want to go to Plumfield. That would be a really good school to go to. I wish I went to Plumfield. And I just love how happy Joe is in this book. She's doing the thing that she's called to do. And she has a wonderful marriage with Professor Bear. And I just found it enchanting. So anyway, so in February is Joe's Boys, which is a continuation of the different boys that we meet at the school, and maybe some new ones too. I can't quite remember it, but what happens when they get a little bit older. So that's it. That's my review for Little Men, and I'm sorry again I went on too long. Bye.